So once we've created this belief and we start cultivating this growth mindset through awareness that we can actually make a change and we can actually learn what we're trying to learn, the second thing we then need to do is we want to create an optimal state. Our gateway to learning begins with being in this right state. To support neuroplasticity, there are two key states that we need to create. So the first one is alertness, and the second one is focus. At the very start of the workshop, I asked you what you'd hope to get out of this and why it was important to you to learn how to learn. One really simple strategy to create alertness is to recognize why you're learning something. And it's really closely linked with motivation. Our reason for learning, it might be driven by love. Like we might learn a language because we've got a foreign partner, or we might learn something so that we can help someone close to us. It might be on status. We might need to learn about communication so that we can get a promotion at work. It might be based on fear, in which we're trying to learn about communication so that we don't get fired from work. Or it might be from self-actualization in the sense that we want to learn something so that we can be the best version of ourselves. Now, there's loads of reasons why we want to do something, why we want to learn. But if you can identify a kit of reasons and reasons that are personal to you as to why you want to create or make a particular change, or why you want to learn something, it actually creates a chemical response in the brain which releases epinephrine, and that actually supports alertness. If you can just take that moment and understand, if you're learning something, why you're trying to learn it and what impact that will have and how it will benefit you, it's going to be fundamental to your ability to stay alert while you're learning it. Now, there's a couple of other things that we can do as well. Getting a good night's sleep is one of them. If you can get some sunlight early, while the sun is low in the sky, the angle of the rays is actually really good for supporting alertness. Or if we can do a brief bout of light movement before we go into any sort of learning activity or bout of learning, if you like. Now, if all of those fail, you do have one trusty sidekick that you can always turn to, which is coffee. You'll be very pleased to know coffee does have a positive impact on alertness because it reduces what's called adenosine, which is a chemical that creates sleepiness. So if none of the above work, just get a coffee and away you go. At the start, I asked you to stare at this little focus point. Why do you think I asked you to stare at this? It's actually so that you could check out your hair. The reason I asked you to do it was to create focus. Mental focus actually follows visual focus. Okay, so our visual system can be really blurry, but it can also be laser sharp. So by creating this visual focus, for example, staring at a particular point in the screen, it actually helps us create this kind of cone of attention in which the surrounding environment is almost shut off. Little experiment, take your finger, put it in front of your, that's about a foot in front of your nose, and I want you to just stare at the center point of your finger. Now I want you to take the finger of the other hand and put it to the side, right? So over to the right. You'll immediately notice a difference in clarity. We can either look at very, very small regions of space with a lot of detail, or we can dilate our gaze and see big pieces of visual space with very, very little detail. And it's this kind of trade-off between them. We can either see things with super specific, or we can see and get in a lot of information without being very detailed. So if you can focus on something very, very particular, you can shut off what is happening around you. So by creating a kind of focal point at the distance in which you're trying to learn, so for example, if you're trying to learn from a screen, having a focal point at the distance away from you that the screen is going to be useful to help trigger visual focus, which is going to stimulate mental focus. Alternatively, if you're listening to something, you're actually going to be able to focus better with your eyes closed. Imagine you're on the bus, right? You're traveling if you get public transport. You're on the bus, you're listening to your podcast, cruising along, and then out the window, you notice there's been a car crash, right? Everyone's fine, but that car crash catches your attention, okay? And you immediately start seeing what's happening. You focus and you pay attention to the car crash. And one thing you'd probably notice is that as soon as you get away from the car crash, you realize that everything that you've been listening to, you've heard nothing. You've absolutely not taken any of it in. And that's because the visual system is stronger than the auditory system. So if you're trying to focus on both things, the visual system will always override the auditory system. That does beg the question of how can we use both visual and auditory learning strategies without creating conflicting focus? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that, so I don't actually know, but there must be a way. But if you can create that visual focus, then you will really enhance your ability to mentally focus. So if we know that visual focus is essential to mental focus, then obviously removing visual distractions becomes really important. So taking your phone out of your room, removing your clutter from your workspace, working in a quiet, secluded area. The problem with focus is it's super hard to maintain, right? Developing your ability to focus is a skill. It's a skill within itself, so it will take practice. So if your focus does drift, which it will, and they say that it typically takes around 23 minutes to regain your focus again, your best strategy to try and regain mental focus is to regain visual focus by staring at a particular focal point. You might have a sheet of paper on your wall that has a target and you just stare at that center point. Now, that will be really, really valuable to help you start to recreate mental focus if you do get yourself distracted. And then the last strategy is to actually learn in 90-minute learning bouts, followed by a 20-minute rest. Within the body, we have what's known as ultradian rhythms. We cycle through these kind of 90-minute bouts in which our level of arousal and our capacity to focus is going to fluctuate. It's going to increase and it's going to decrease. Now, by optimizing your learning schedule and limiting your learning bouts to 90 minutes, and then following it up with a period of rest, like a 20-minute rest, you're actually going to start working with your physiology instead of just trying to stare at a screen endlessly for 6 hours. In doing this, and by paying attention to it, you might be able to start recognizing the times in which you're most productive and the times in which you kind of experience those lulls, which is actually a very reasonable time to have a break. You could take this one further. You could break this 90-minute block and you could actually break it into 25-minute chunks followed by a 5-minute rest. So you could do 25 minutes with a 5-minute rest, another 25, 5, 25, 5, and then do a 20-minute rest at the end. This is known as the Pomodoro method. It utilizes what's called the primacy and recency effect. And the primacy and recency effect basically says that the most you're going to remember is going to be at the start of this presentation and at the end of this presentation. And you're not really going to remember too much in the middle. So this primacy and recency effect tells us that we typically retain most information at the start and at the end of a learning bout, and we don't remember too much in the middle. So by using these 25-minute cycles, in a 90-minute block, you're now getting 3 starts and 3 ends of higher retention instead of only having 1 start and 1 end. Now, the caveat to that is it means that you're going to have to regain focus every 30 minutes. So this is going to be most beneficial when you've been able to kind of cultivate that ability to focus and regain focus quite quickly.